What up, Steeler fans? Welcome back to State of the Steelers, where today we're talking in some breaking news. The Pittsburgh Steelers have hired an offensive coordinator. Arthur Smith, former head coach of the Atlanta Falcons and offensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans, is now taking his duties and his job responsibilities to the Pittsburgh Steelers and will be their next offensive coordinator, as reported by Ian Rappaport and many others. Apparently, Arthur Smith had multiple offers, and he chose the Pittsburgh Steelers because he wanted an opportunity to work with Mike Tomlin and because of the culture and the organization that is the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I'll be honest, I was a little bit surprised about the hiring of Arthur Smith, mainly because in Mike Tomlin's postseason press conference, he spoke about what he wanted in an offensive coordinator. And to me, it very much seemed like they were trying to find an offensive coordinator who is innovative, ready for today's NFL, modern NFL. And to me, it kind of seemed like Mike Tomlin was wanting a offensive coordinator that was more pass centric, and he wanted to develop the quarterbacks. The Pittsburgh Steelers have Kenny Pickett, who was a first round pick a couple of years ago. There's a big question mark there as whether or not he's going to be a guy moving forward. Is Arthur Smith really the guy that's going to be able to develop him? Well, let's look into who Arthur Smith is and what he's done up to this point. Arthur Smith, he actually played ball when he was in college. He was guard for North Carolina from 2001 to 2005, and he ended up having some sort of foot injury, requiring surgery and ending his career. For those that didn't know, Arthur Smith's father is like the founder, Frederick W. Smith, of FedEx. Frederick FedEx, I get it. I used to think it was like Federal Express or something like that, but now I think I get where it comes from. I digress. But in 2007, he became the defense quality control coach for the Washington Redskins. And as I mentioned before, his father was the founder of FedEx. He was also a minority owner of the team. So I think that's kind of how he got his foot in the door as far as coaching goes. It was because of the connection with his dad. In 2010, he'd be hired as a defensive intern and administrative assistant for Ole Miss. So he stayed with the Redskins for a few years and then moved on to Ole Miss. In 2011, Smith was hired to become the defensive quality coach for the Tennessee Titans. So he kind of went up the chain through the defensive side, which makes sense. If you want to attack a defense, you probably should understand how the defense works, the ins and the outs of it. So him coming up defensive minded may or may not be a good thing. We'll see. But while he was at Tennessee as a defensive quality control coach, guess who his head coach was? For those that said Mike Munchak, you'd be correct. There's a connection there. Now, the Pittsburgh Steelers have had an issue with the offensive line, whether it's been in pass protection, run blocking, and or even development of some of these guys. I mean, you see Kendrick Green go off and become a serviceable offensive lineman with Houston while he's healthy. You see Kevin Dodson go out there to Los Angeles and, be an all-pro right guard out there. And one of the things that he said was they put him in a position where he felt natural, at the right guard position. And kind of the same thing when it came to Kendrick. They moved him to guard. He'd only played center a handful of times in college. Maybe there's something to get a Mike Munchak in there. He can develop these players that the Steelers have and maybe even put them in position for better success. But while he was in Tennessee, he was promoted to the offensive line coach and the assistant tight ends coach in 2013. After Munchak was fired, Ken Wisenhunt retained him as the assistant tight end coach. Wisenhunt was then fired halfway through the 2015 season, and he was replaced by Mike Mularkey. Some of these names are starting to get kind of familiar, don't you think? Mularkey was there until 2016, and Smith was the new tight ends coach, so no longer the assistant. He gets promoted up. So Mike Vrabel comes in 2017, and Smith is kept again. So regardless of who's been the head coach, Arthur Smith has kind of kept his position there. Kind of probably says something about who he is as a person, how he relates to players and personnel. If there's a lot of change at the top, and yet he's still one of the constant guys, that speaks loudly, in my opinion. What also speaks loudly is, tight ends coach, offensive line coach, defensive line coach. You look what he did in Tennessee with Derrick Henry, with Tannehill, a lot of play action, a lot of runs. And again, I ask, is this a move you make if you're trying to develop a young quarterback? I mean, if you go back and you listen to even Art Rooney's yearly postseason conference and interview, and he even said that they wanted to be more innovative in the passing game and get somebody fresh. Arthur Smith isn't that, in my opinion. He's more old school. And even once he left Tennessee, he became their offensive coordinator after Matt LaFleur left to Green Bay in 2019. And under him, The Titans saw the highest scoring in 16 years. Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill, Jonnu Smith, they all had career years in that year. They even made it up to the AFC Championship. They were contenders. That's what ended up getting him the gig in Atlanta. Now, there are some offensive coordinators that are out there who should just stay as offensive coordinators. Maybe perhaps being hyper-focused in one area, benefits them more than trying to spread their talents across the board. But again, the question is, how does this fit with Kenny Pickett? I think that, in my opinion, when you look at the success he's had, it's been with Ryan Tannehill. Even in Atlanta, I think the most success that he had out there was under Taylor Heinicke. These aren't guys with a tremendous amount of arm talent. They got some talent there. They got arm talent, but they're not, elite top of the league guys. But these are also guys that had been in the league for a while. These aren't guys that Arthur Smith had to develop. My question now becomes, do the Pittsburgh Steelers maybe want to go and get somebody they don't have to develop? There's been a lot of talk about Mason Rudolph possibly being that guy and, being in competition with Kenny Pickett for the quarterback position. And I think that when you look at play action pass, which Kenny Pickett really didn't run a lot of, you're looking at a lot of under center stuff. Kenny Pickett didn't really run a lot of. And you're looking at an offensive coordinator who hasn't developed any quarterbacks before. You probably can assume that the choice for the quarterback of this team is probably a quarterback who doesn't need any more developing, who is kind of, more towards their ceiling than their floor. And I bring up Mason Rudolph because he had an interview with Ramon Foster not too long ago. He talked about being a part of the Breakfast Club, and that was Al Villanueva, Dave DeCastro, Pouncey, Ramon Foster, the offensive line guys. And he talked about how that was like a rite of passage to get there. Right? You had to earn your right to be at the breakfast table. Well, all those guys that we mentioned, these are all leaders. There are no leaders on the offense. And if you go back to when Pouncey, Dave DeCastro, Ramon Foster were the core group of this team, offensively, the leadership was there. So if you want to maybe recapture some of that Steelers way or mentality, why not capture the guy who led this team in the latter part of the season, who was a part of that team that had that chemistry, that bonding, had the right mentality, the right focus in the right direction. I think more than anything, I think that's going to be something that is going to be huge for the quarterback position. And the Pittsburgh Steelers have been looking for that since Ben Roethlisberger retired. That's why they made Mitch Trubisky the captain. That's why they made Kenny Pickett the captain. They wanted their quarterback to lead their team. And if you listen to what some of the players have said, that is exactly what they said about Mason Rudolph. He led in those last 3 games of the season and that playoff game. I mean, on the comment section, what do you guys think? What do you guys think of the acquisition? I know that a lot of people were more looking at, maybe perhaps somebody off of the Shanahan tree or whatnot. I mean, to a certain extent, you can kind of say that this guy, Arthur Smith, kind of worked underneath Matt LaFleur. Even though Matt LaFleur wasn't the head coach, he was the offensive coordinator. That was his game plan that he was implementing as a tight ends coach. So it's not too far away from a coaching tree that everybody would, love to have. But again, let me know. Hit that like and subscribe button, ring that notification bell. With that being said, I'm out of here, guys. We'll see you next time. Peace.